I can't really ask this kind of well, kind of. Then I'll have to do
Okay, I'm going to try to, try to very quickly create this. The most of it is pretty much template code. Once you understand this, you should be very quickly be able to create. We are not having too many properties, so I'm just going to sort of copy paste. The first is the properties. So I need, instead of college, I want it to be conference. And in the MVC design, you want every one of your classes in the model to have this ID. Okay. And then the key, you have to designate one of the properties as a key. And here we have designated our conference ID. You have to bring in the data annotations. Microsoft, and I think many other environments, Ruby, Java, also have this data annotations, which are basically square brackets, and then you'll have this whatever the annotation is within the square brackets. It's pretty much like a class and a method, except using this notation. Later on, you'll see that you can give attribute or property values as well. Anyways, we'll get to that a little later. Let me just switch to, you need, whenever you create your own constructor, reset something, what do you need to include? Okay, Krista? An empty constructor. And the MVC, again, the entity framework needs to do its work, so always keep in mind that you need this. So again, I'm going to switch right here. And what tells you that a particular method is a constructor? What are the two indicators? Only if you know that. There are two indicators for differentiating or distinguishing something as being a constructor. Okay, Eric?
It should have the same name as the class you created.
Okay, the same name. So this clearly should be changed to conference. What's the other indicator? What do you not see in a constructor that you will see in every other method? Okay, Liz?
Parameters.
What do you call this? So are you saying that other methods won't have parameters?
I guess return type.
Okay, so you will not have a return type in a constructor. Why doesn't a constructor have a return type?
It doesn't return anything?
Well, how do you use a constructor? Let's see, where did we use it? Right here. When we created new college objects, we are actually assigning it here. So if you are assigning, it means that it is returning. But what is it returning? It's an object or instance of the class, so which means it always returns an object of the class. So it's implicit, not explicit. So that's why we don't have a return type. And this is true across all languages and programming environments. Anyways, so those are small things to be aware of. Okay, and then once you have that, I'll just create this as a static method to populate the conference. Okay. One thing I could have done, which I didn't do here, could have renamed everything. Instead, I could have, there's an option. If I make a change here, it allows me to go in and rename in all the places, which is what I should have done. Yes.
Well, when you right click,
Yeah.
well, I kind of did that. I copied and pasted and you right clicked and said rename,
Yeah.
and it changed the name of both of my classes.
In both your classes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
Usually,
identity class, actually.
that's interesting. I don't know if you can restrict it to one.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I've not noticed it. Oh. That's a good thing to know. Okay, now somebody can, always I keep telling you, we need to know what's wrong and why before we can make corrections. So if I were to try to build it, I'm obviously going to get an error now. Why is this an error here? Tell me if you recognize it. Okay, since Kosh raised your hand, you can tell me.
Is it because it's public college?
Okay, so what is this promising? This is promising to do what?
Bringing down the list of colleges.
Yeah, it's promising to return a list of colleges. And what is the body of the method doing? The header is promising this, and what is the...
It's bringing down the list of conferences.
Okay, good. We are returning a list of conferences, which is different from what the method promised. This is one of the nice things about the IntelliSense and this Visual Studio environment. If you work in other environments, at some point I'll introduce Python to you. It's a very simple environment, but it won't catch errors like this. Initially, it will catch it when it's running. But anyways, so I have to change this to conference here. So now I have my class created. Okay, so what's the next step? What did Ashley? What did you do? Okay, yeah, you want to go into the identity model and bring in the property here. This is what connects to the, it's inside of application DB context, public DB set, conference, and conferences. This is, again, the notation that MVC recommends whenever you create these properties. Give the plural, and you can see it represents the table And for those of you who created these, who migrated it over, you can see it's having that plural notation. So this is a key step that you need to have. Without this, the migration won't take place. So that's the second step. After you create the class, let's see what would be a third step. Did I make it?
Launch a configuration.
Okay, good. The seed. So I want to have some sample data. Now again, do these 3 steps. Copy, paste it here, and instead of it being a list of colleges, this is going to be a list of conferences. So let's see what happens here. Conference list. I'm going to change it. Let's change anything. Oh. One of the things I would recommend is using this IntelliSense to find method. So I used the plural. If you type it in and give the singular, it's you're not going to find it. Conference list. Okay. Do you understand why this is giving an error here? I'm trying to add it to the college. Instead, I need to get it to the conferences. Okay, I'll build it so that I know it's compiling. Once it compiles, so these 3 steps, what's the next one that I need to do? Okay, how many of you know it other than this? Do all of you? Okay, TJ, what do you do?
Add migration, add a conference.
Yeah, you would add migration, so I added conference, so I'll say add migration. Let's see. Okay, so if you look at the, so just as we did this, add migration, and what happens if I do this? Add migration. I added a class called conference. I'll call the migration conference as well. Do you remember what the problem is if you do it? Yeah.
You want to just make their name so it doesn't have the name similar to what we were actually adding conference instead of just conference.
Yeah. So what happens if we have it by the same name?
There is an identity issue.
Is it an identity issue? Why? What happens? What's the result?
There's a problem with it having the same name.
Okay, where is the same name? What has the same name? Currently, yeah, there are 2 different classes. So the migration class also gets the same name. So that's why you want to avoid that naming conflict. So you want it to reflect what you actually did. So I added conference. So I'll add the migration. And if it goes through properly, again, this is a check for you to see if it went through properly or not. It's to see what the C# code for, essentially this is the C# equivalent of SQL. So we are creating this as a primary key with conference ID in the conferences table. Okay, so once you have it, the next step is you don't want to update the database, but you really want to roll it back and then move it forward. So you want to say target 0 dash target :0 to revert it back. So when it reverts, okay, so if I go back here and use using this one. So if I refresh tables, you'll see that there are no tables here. And finally, I want to update it to move it forward with the new migration and the new seed data. Okay, so if I go in here, refresh, I should see. Okay, so a couple of questions here. Well, I'm starting with TJ. So what was your problem?
I missed the step of setting the view set.
Okay, so essentially, yeah. So if you do what TJ didn't do was what he didn't do was to add this, and when you didn't add this, what resulted when you did? Yeah, so when you don't have it,
it wouldn't connect to the database.
So if you looked at a previous version of your added conference, did you delete that?
None of that was filled in.
Okay, yeah, it would be empty. You wouldn't see, if it was created, you will only see an up method without anything inside it. So, yes. You're having an empty, okay, delete everything here. All of these migrations. If you're going to have, at some point, like, this gives you a sense of whatever the history of your migrations. But that afterward, if there are 50 or whatever, 25 migrations, it becomes hard. So what do? You make an initial migration. So delete all of this, then create a new migration, call it initial, and then roll it back, and then move it forward. So that, but it has to be an initial migration. You have to follow this fairly rigorously, otherwise it's going to give you problems. After a while, it becomes a routine process. Okay, once you have these two, we can go to the connection. At this point, if you are truly following the agile approach, you will have a test, the unit test. I asked you to do it. How many of you have this? Okay. So at this point, if you run it, you should be seeing green on, well, the first three essentially will, by default, they are simple ones. At some point, I wanted to take you into the controller to show you. That's why I'm leaving them as is for controller testing. But really, they are not. They are more for examples. The one that's obviously more relevant to us is the one that we created. And I told you that I tend to do the test off the model rather than off the controller. So we created this models folder for testing. Okay. I'm not going to create the test now. Instead, I'll move into well, one is I want to get into the class diagram, and then for the connecting class. And after that, I'll come around to look at your group projects and see if you've been, I want you to translate it onto your project as well, whatever we are doing with our individual project. Okay, so what we need here is this connecting link, which is the college conference between college and conference. So let's go ahead and create a new model class. Okay. Okay, so this is a little different, and let's see how many of you are able to figure this out. What are the properties that you'll have for college conference? Some are obvious, others maybe less so. Okay, Megan, what are the obvious ones?
The ones in the table.
Okay, try and go ahead. So we'll create the ones in the table, and then we need some more, and we'll try to figure out what those others are. There is the system, date, time, class. So that's what we'll use for date begin and date end. Okay. And this is going to be our key. So okay, so this is the easy part. These other pieces now are a little trickier because now this serves as a connecting link. So if you were in a relational database course, what would you be doing now? Or what did we do prior when we were working directly on the database? What did we do when we got work? Well, I'll ask Ashley since. The foreign keys. So we created the foreign key connections. Where were they created? We created them in this table, right? From here we connected to conference and to college. Here we are going to, in the object-oriented world, instead of, because we are straddling the two worlds, the object-oriented and the relational worlds, we will actually do this. We will introduce the two, whatever will act as a foreign key, and what acts as a foreign key here? How many foreign keys do we have? Two, okay. And what are they? Okay, public in college ID, get set. So that goes one side of this class diagram. Okay, from college conference to college. And then the other is from college conference to the conference. So, okay. Now, one of the things that we have to add in. So this is, if we are doing, this is purely for the entity framework to be able to translate it, and we want it to be called by this name, okay, when it creates the foreign keys on the database. But so if we didn't give it, it would call it by something else. But this is, so I'll put this here. This is the relational model foreign key connections. But in the object-oriented world, we make the connections in a slightly different way. So I'll call these the object-oriented connections. Does anyone know how you would connect in an object-oriented world? Has anyone done how you navigate? Remember in our class diagram we said you want to be able to navigate between classes. So if you start at conference or in college conference, you want to get to college and conference objects. So it's very similar to what we did with the foreign key in the relational database, except here we are not going to reference an ID. Instead, we are going to reference an object of the class. So we are going to reference a college object. I'll just call it college. Get set. And all the properties are always set in uppercase. So the first one, MVC notes, is referring to the data type. So even though you have the same name for both the property and the class or data type, it's going to be, it recognizes it. And then the second object-oriented connection is to conference. Okay. With these connections, if this is what MVC is really interested in, because remember, the entity framework, it translates from the class code or the object-oriented code to the relational code. So it's going to look at this and say, well, I need to create foreign keys. So it doesn't quite understand that we've already created properties that are going to serve as foreign keys. So we have to tell the entity framework in a couple of ways. The first thing that we have to tell it is, well, don't look at this connection, the object-oriented connection, and create your own foreign key. This is one of those things where I am very tempted to allow you to do it this way and see what it does. And then you can see that it does it in a strange way, and then maybe you'll know it's not so good, and then you will. But this is why I don't know if it's such a good idea to teach stuff, the correct stuff in the first place, because it's, well, anyway, so let me get, so essentially what we are going to tell the entity framework is that this is already a foreign key that we are designating. The way you tell it is, what do I tell it? Yeah, foreign key. So you use this foreign key annotation. Okay, so you have to say this. So what is different from this foreign key from the key? What library is it looking at here? Previously we were just looking at data annotations. This is looking specifically at database schemas. Do you know what a schema is? Yeah.
It's how the database is set up, like all the rows in the table and all the tables in the rows, or all the tables in the database.
Yeah, basically it's how the database is structured and connected. That's the schema of the database. So basically the foreign key. But what we are saying is, and this is where I told you it acts almost like you have methods here. So if you open the parentheses, you'll see that it takes a parameter value, which is the name. So basically we are saying, well, we already created a foreign key to use with this connection, and what was that foreign key? It's this college ID. So within quotes, college ID. And the same thing for the conference. So we are going to tell the entity framework, don't create another foreign key. Okay, so we have this specified. Now the last thing is when we were working directly on the SQL code. Let me see if I can pull up that reasons files, basketball DDL. When we were creating the college conference, we discussed one thing. We used this as an identity self-generated, auto-generated column. But we also did something else. What was that? Well, okay, so that was one thing that we did. So in that case, we were trying to connect up, sort of keep track of which is the college conference ID, which is the conference ID, and what's the college ID. And now the entity framework, MVC, does it for us, so we don't have to worry about where to start. But what was the other piece? When we do this, what was the concern? Any concern? Well, do you remember why we did this here? Okay, Ashley, why did we do this? Well, it's sort of on the track, but actually, what is the concern we have?
We did it so that like a college could enter into the Big 12 and then leave and go to the Big East and then 10 years later come back to the Big 12.
So essentially, this prevents. So if you have the same college going out and coming back, this will automatically just generate a value. So it doesn't. Which means that if we just had like a college and a conference connected, if we come back, like WVU leaves left the Big East, let's say they come back another 10 years, it'll just connect the two, try to connect the two, and it might say, well, you're trying to violate the primary key, or if this is not the composite primary key, it will just insert a new row with the same values. And the other problem is, let's say WVU actually went to the Big East, and so it's not so much an issue of them coming back, but let's say they went to the Big 12, and I didn't notice that there are maybe 1,000 rows, and I didn't notice, and I typed WVU, inserted WVU twice into the Big 12. What will happen? If I didn't have this and I inserted, let's see, WVU twice into, I don't know which one is WVU. Okay, if I just said, this is setting WVU, if I did this, what will happen? It will just insert it twice because it doesn't know that this shouldn't be repeated. The only thing that prevents it from repeating is this alternate key, because the primary key, all that it will do is it will just add in a new ID value. So that's the problem. So to avoid that, we have to do what we did with the alternate key. Here you don't have an alternate key, so you have another, you can specify the alternate key in a different way by saying key and then column and key comma column and then specifying the order. So this is the first of the columns that I have in the alternate key, the college ID. Okay. What's the second column? It's the conference ID. So order, it's a zero-based index, so 0, 1. And is there anything else that's involved in the alternate key? The date begin. Okay. So I come back in here, and this is the third component of the key. Okay, so you can see that this involves a little more work compared to the clauses which are not child clauses. So I call this a child clause. Why do I call this a child clause? The more appropriate term is a dependent clause. Maybe all children are dependent, so I should call it dependent. So anyway, so why is this a dependent clause? Yeah.
Because it connects with college and conference classes.
Okay.
It has attributes from each of those classes.
It has attributes that reference these two classes. So if those two classes don't exist, then this cannot exist. So that's why the dependent classes tend to be more complex compared to the independent ones, but it's easier to lay it out. Okay. So once you have this, the next step, do you understand what we have done here? Yes.
I think you need for the date and also, like, why are both being characterized?
Well, are you saying why didn't I add that as a part of the alternate key? Okay, anyone, what's the answer to Kasha's question? Kasha is asking, why didn't I just put this for the end date as well and make it the fourth component of the alternate key? Yes, Krista.
Because that's not part of our hierarchy.
We
don't need that piece.
So as Krista pointed out, the only case where you would want it is, so we are making this an alternate key, okay, so which means that the only way you would need it is, let's look at some sample data here. Okay. So this, once we make the alternate key, this won't be possible because we can't have the same start date for two different colleges in a conference. We can't have the same start date. It'll have to be two different start dates. So if I did come back here, it'll have to be, let's say, 2017. And well, what was it actually? That was, I just copied everything in, so I'm going to say this is 2017, and let's say, trying to think of, so if I were to, so the story here is, let's see, this is for WVU. Was in the Big East Conference, went to the Big 12, okay, on this date, left the Big 12, came back to the Big East. Let's say this was, okay, so this is 100. And the only way that this is going to cause a problem is if you can tell me the scenario, and this is why I keep saying connect up your design to what happens in real world situations. So what we just did was to say, well, if a college leaves a conference and comes back, this shows that the college connected back with the same conference, right? So this would be a conflict were it not that we also added the date in. Okay, this is the begin date. So this distinguishes these two rows. Now, when would these two rows be requiring the end date also to separate them? So for that to happen, this has to be the same, right? When would this happen? If it was a part of two conferences, if it was a part of two conferences, we would have just done this, right? We would not have had to we wouldn't have had to create this new row here. So we would create a new row only when what happens? What's that?
When the year starts.
Well, what this is denoting is that a college is associated with a conference. So you had WV associated with the Big East. They left to go to the Big 12, and then they came back to the Big East. If the date begin is the same date, it means that there was a particularly indecisive athletic director, right? What did he do? He made us get out of the Big 12, go to the whatever, start with the Big East, went to the Big 12, and on the same day, he decided to switch back to the Big East. So only under that circumstance would you need the end date also to come into play. Okay, and if it's a particularly indecisive person, maybe they made it multiple times. In which case, you need to bring in not just the date, but also the time. So in this scenario, you wouldn't need the end date. But if you're doing, let's say, some stock transactions, and you're doing, what do they call it, day trading, where people or even computerized systems constantly keep trading, then you might actually trade within minutes. Buy, sell, buy, in which case you have to include the time maybe to the second to distinguish. Okay, anyway, so that was the long discussion as to why this was not needed. Okay, but we understand that now. Yeah.
I'm getting errors because we've already made the date begin and date end, or I did in the beginning of your comment.
Where's that?
Maybe you don't know. Yeah, no, I have it. You don't.
Okay, so let's create the constructor. We have maybe, let's go another 10 minutes to get this over to the database. So do what is needed to create the constructor. I guess you run entry constructor. Try to do it without looking up, so to see if you are able to figure this out. Okay, one of the things that I try to follow is for the parameter I use lowercase just to distinguish this from the property. We are going to use the other, we need the dates that we have to use. As far as the objects and references, we don't have to give the objects here. We will, we can actually, we are using it more for the navigation rather than for assigning values. So the last method I'm going to have, yes.
I don't know if you wrote this down, but we need a college conference ID.
Well, do we need a college? That's a good question. Do we need a college conference ID here? Okay, Liz?
No, it's an identity, so they can look at it.
So this will be generated in the database. So I'm going to do the same thing which we did with the other college conference. Populate college conferences, and I'm going to say this is a static method. Okay, so this is just to get rid of the error. I'll just put a couple of rows of data in, and I'll do something which similar to the SQL statements we used, which was let's see, we associated WVU with so WVU with two different conferences, and then I guess we have Duke. So it's just going to, the simplest thing would be to just create college conference, and it's going to take in the college ID. WVU is 1. Big 12 is 1, and then the date begin, and here as the date time, it's a little tricky. You cannot just do what we did in SQL Server. You have to, date time is a class, so you have to create an object of date time. So I'll create one here for date begin, new date time, and what does this tell you, this IntelliSense here? As soon as I typed in new date time, it's telling me that there are, what does 1 of 12 mean? TJ?
Different type of parameters you can put in. Overloaded.
Yeah, it's overloaded. The constructor is overloaded, so there are 12 different ways that you can create a date-time object. The one that we are going to use is potentially the simplest of the options, which is to say int year, month, day. So, if we are going to give the equivalent of this is month, day, year, so we have to change it to year, month, and then the day. So this was for the big, if you are saying that they were in the, I'll just use these values for now. Let's see, so 0, 1, 12, 1966, that's 1996, 12, and then 1. That's the date begin. And then let's say for date end, we'll for initially give it as date end. Well, let's see, some other date on which it actually ends. So let's see, I'll say sometime 2010. So 12/31/2010. So 2010, 12/31. Okay, so I'm going to put a date begin and a date end. Okay, so I created my new instance. I want to add it to the college conference list. Oops, college conference. Okay, I'm going to also assign WVU, well, this was the Big East, so just to make it that, well, unless you want to assign WVU to the ACC, I'm just going to add in another row of data here. Below Big 12, I'm going to add in, well, actually above Big 12, I'm going to add in Big East. What difference does it make where I add in Big 12 and Big East? Why did I say I want to put Big East first? So I just went into populate conferences and added this in. Why do you think I did it first? What am I using here as my conference ID? Using 1. So this is referring to the Big East. I'm going to say that WVU changed conferences from 1 refers to the college ID, 2 refers to the conference ID. They switched to the Big East. But what should I change? The date begin is no longer this date, right? So I have to change it to date begin is new date time, and it's 2011/1/1. Date end is, it's not ended as that, so which means it is. I want to assign it to this, and it's complaining because date time and simple data types cannot be assigned null values. Do you remember what we did to allow null values to be assigned? What did we have to do? Null value means, what does null value means in terms of the real world situation? It's the current conference, right? So we need a null value, but you can see it's not accepting it. Date time by default doesn't accept. So what do we need to make it? What do you remember what we did? This is actually a very useful concept to keep in mind again across different programming environments. Java has an equivalent of it. You have to use, so we have to go back into a property when we are defining it, because ultimately it's going to be stored through the property. So we want to make this, put the question mark and makes it, it's called a nullable date time. So to make it nullable, and this is for all the simple data types. When I say simple, integer, double, decimal, date time, those are the simple ones, and Boolean. So put a question mark here for both the date times. Okay. And then this is also then going to be nullable date time parameters. The only one you absolutely have to make nullable is the end date. Actually, if you're following the business rule, can we have a null value for date begin? You probably don't want all of it. So let's remove that and make only the date end nullable. Okay, so which means I'll remove this question mark here. And then finally, so I'll have to, for date end, I'll have to use the question mark. Okay, so that meets the requirement for WVU switching conferences. And finally, I want to give some dates for Duke entering the ACC. I don't think they've ever switched conferences, so I'm just going to give some really early date. Maybe I'll go back to 1980 or something, which actually and the date end, do I need to change that? I need to change it only if they switch conferences if they have ended their association, so they're associated there. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick build to see all the code that I added in. Is it working? I'm going to rebuild the solution. Okay, so it's building without errors. Now the next part, so I have the class, and I'm going to go over it since there are only about 9 minutes left. Go into the identity models, yes.
Do we need to change the ID numbers for Duke and ACCs?
For the Duke, okay, so Duke is, yeah, correct. What Eric just pointed out, I didn't change. So 1 refers to WVU, so I'm going to change it to 2, and the ACC is 3. So 2 connecting with 3. Okay. Okay. And then I'll go to identity models, add in a DB set, public DB set. This is college conference, and college, usually I'm just going to add an S at the end. Okay, so this is the second piece. The third piece, we want to get to our configuration seed method and add this in. So begin to make it faster, I'm going to copy paste. But if I do this, I have to make sure college conference. Okay, so if I have this, again, before we do migrations, you have to make sure it's building. If it doesn't build, a migration won't work. So I'll finish building it again. Okay, once it builds, go back to, essentially it's this, it's the same 3 steps. I'm going to add migration. This time, instead of saying added conference, I'm going to say added college conference. Enable to determine primary key. Okay, let's see. Use the column attribute to specify. Okay, so actually that's interesting, right? So this is only if you have a composite primary key. Okay, so we cannot use what we did, what I showed you here. This works only if I have 3 columns making up the composite key. So what it's saying is I cannot designate this as a primary key and then these as well. So actually, this is something that I discussed in 452, and I forgot about this. So, so instead, the alternate key is not specified this way. So let me make a note for the equivalent of alternate key. So the way you do it is you cannot do it this way. You have to use need to use the index. You cannot use the key annotation. So instead, use the index annotation, and the way you do it is index, open up parentheses, and so as I said, it's almost like a method here. So the first parameter for this is whatever you want to call this. So I'm going to call this index as college conference index. Okay. That's the name, which is a string. And then the next property that I'm going to say is, it's saying, is it clustered? And I'm going to say it is clustered with taking a set of 3 different properties together. So I'm going to say 1 for it's true. And then whether it's unique, I guess I could also say, let's see if I can say it's clustered equals true. Okay, I think 1 and saying this is, I believe, the same. Well, and then I need to specify is unique to be true, and then I'm going to specify the order. So it's a 0-based index, so I'm going to start with 0 and go through this. Okay. So this is I close parentheses and then close this first. Close parentheses, close the square brackets. Okay. So this is my index for one part of the index is the college ID. The second part, so instead of having this, I'm going to try to revise this. This is the order is 1, And then finally, over here, order is 2. Okay. So yes, this is what I did previously. You cannot create multiple keys. So before we do the adding the migration, go ahead and rebuild the solution. Running out of time now. I wanted to see how many of you have your projects visible on Visual Studio Team Services. I know that Logan's group, you already had it. I need to check. Let me just get this migrated and then I'll check this. Okay, add migration, added college conference. Okay, so it should, yes.
Do we have a question mark anywhere other than Corey first initialize the end?
No. Well, question mark date end, yeah, right here in the constructor. And the third place is right here. Okay. So once you add the migration, you should be seeing added college conference, and you should be able to read what it is doing. It's set up a primary key, foreign key, and an index. The next thing is to roll it back. So update database target 0. Okay, and then the third step is update the database. So those three always go together. Add migration, reverse it back. Cannot create more than one clustered index. Okay, there's already a clustered index. Okay, so what we have to do then is, which means I shouldn't call it clustered over here. The simplest would be, what I'm going to do is there is already a clustered index on the primary key, which means, do you see this where it says index is clustered? Okay, I'm going to remove this from here in the code. This is inside of it, but the other place that I need to also change it for the long-term purpose is what? Go back to college conference, and where did it make it the clustered index? Yeah.
Index.
Right here, where it says this clustered is true. Go ahead and remove that as well.
From all of them?
From all of them. Okay. We could do another migration now, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to just update the database for it to go to the database and populate it. Okay, enable because of pending migrations. Okay, what I'm going to do is, because I made a change in the underlying clause, I'm going to just remove this last migration. Okay, just the last one, deleted, added college conference. Okay, and I'm just going to go through the migration process again after I remove the is clustered. So I'll just do these things. add migration, added college conference. Okay, it's asking me to first revert, so I'm going to revert it, update database target 0. So for revert it, then if it says data will be lost, do you remember what I suggested doing? At the very end, add this dash force. Okay. So go to the end and say force dash force. Okay, so it reverts it. Then we want to, well, let's see if this added conference. Okay, this is not what we wanted. Okay, what I'm going to do, since we run out of time, I'm going to go through this beginning of next class. There is a chance that I may not be able to come on Thursday. I might be having to be in Pittsburgh, so I might teach this online. But I want you to come to class to work as a group. So if one of you can project it onto the screen, then there's anyone, you can log in as anything and project it there. So I'll go over this part again. I'll stop at this point, but come in prepared to work on your group project, and I want to check Visual Studio Team Services to make sure that I'm able to access your accounts. Okay. As I said, I'll revisit this beginning of next class.